all my life, no matter what had happened, I could feel God, I could feel a thread. But I would reach for God, and I had always had guidance and hearing. I could hear things, I could feel the quiet voice inside. None of that. It was all gone. It was pure black. And when you're in that space, everything goes wrong, right? Like you take the baby to the car, you're like, I'm gonna go out in the sun, I'll get a coffee, I'll try and make it good, I'll try and find some good. And the tires blowing, you're like, when you're in that, it's like as if everything is so hard, like you can't. I have such compassion for people in that place because it's almost like reality warps to be that hard.
Fading slow, find and cover in the place we call home. I can't let go, I can't let go.
Hey everyone, my name's Ryan Brown, and today we have Lucy Grace with us. Lucy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. I have to say, by the way, you have an amazing name. Because Lucy means light, right? And then Grace, of course, you have a very light, gracious presence too, so it fits. Makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Mum always said that she knew my name was Lucy even when I wasn't, like I was just in the womb. She didn't even know I was a girl. She said,
Really?
yeah, she talks about that a lot. Yeah, yeah. It's funny.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess it fit for a reason. So yeah, but before getting your story, real quick, for listeners who might be new tuning in, the point of the podcast has been to help sort the various pieces of the spiritual puzzle, help sort what goes where, how they can fit together in regards to your own path and journey, considering there are many roads that lead home. And today we get to address two very important pieces of that puzzle, which is the dark night of the soul and surrender. And so both very prevalent for the spiritual journey. I know the dark night specifically. You may be listening who has already gone through an experience like this, someone who might be in the midst of that right now, or it might be up ahead at some point in time too. And I think the beauty in Lucy's story is really assurance that it's going to be okay, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, so thank you again. Gosh, there's just so much to your story. Hopefully we'll see how much we can cover, but what intrigued me the most was when I first heard your story. I was actually reading a book by Saint John of the Cross, who was a Christian mystic. I'm fairly sure that that's actually where the term dark night of the soul originated. And I'm listening to your story, I'm reading this book, and your story is just overlapping completely with the profoundness in this book. And crazy enough is with your story too, there was never any particular path you're trying to travel or teachings that were being followed. It's completely organic from the very beginning. So before getting to the dark night portion, maybe if we could start the beginning a little bit with, I know from upbringing, I know that wasn't easy as well, but having a sense of connection early on that allowed things to help make sense of for the dark night as far as what's being lost to begin with. And
Yeah, 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 yeah.
mm,
So I often marvel at how when we're suffering as humans, right? If we're in deep suffering and there isn't anyone around to reach for, we all know this place of loneliness, right? When all of a sudden in our lives, the friends that we relied on are kind of gone, or our families like not available or criticizing us to a point where we can't connect. It feels like everywhere we reach, we're alone, and it's often when we're in our deepest moments of suffering. And I've had this thought that life does this, but it does that in these pivotal moments in our life to make us connect. Like when I'm on my knees and there's no one here that I feel can see me or hold me, I have to go in, and God is in me, right? I have to go in, I have to go up, I have to go and find that strength somewhere. So this just happened to be for me in childhood, and for some of us it happens later. For me, I had a really beautiful mum, but she had me young at 20. She had been kind of the black sheep of the family, and before that had had a really rocky teenage years, rocky childhood, a lot of trauma in her childhood, a lot of disconnection in her childhood, had taken drugs, and yeah, as a kid I had a lot of joy. I just felt light. I often wonder if we're born awake, or at least, and then it's conditioned out of us, or at least it feels to me like I was born awake. I remember like utter contentment and joy, and I shouldn't have had that because where I was tough. So we lived in a little house in a street filled with government. We call them state houses, graffiti on the outside of houses, bombed out cars, a lot of violence,
That's in
gangs.
New Zealand, right?
In New Zealand, yeah. In a place called Hamilton in New Zealand, Fairfield. And yeah, like, kids with no shoes. And if nits went around the neighborhood, their heads got shaved. And not everyone, but often. And not always food, not always toys, all that kind of stuff. There were times that mum and I didn't have food. I can remember, we would have to go to the supermarket and she wouldn't have the money to buy food. So we would talk to the manager and we would say, she would literally hold my hand and the shame seeping over her. And she would say, to the manager who's probably like a kid of 18, right? And she's a woman of 28 or something with an 8-year-old. And she would say, I don't have enough food to feed my daughter. I'm wondering if you would let me take some groceries and I could write a check that's predated for next week, or I can come back and pay next week. And she would be shaking and I would feel shame come over me, like I'm less than, I'm, the poor girl and all of that. And sometimes that the manager would say yes, and sometimes the manager would say no. And so then what? Then we get sometimes food parcels. And, there were times we had food too. So it was kind of all of it.
Mm.
But there was a lot of violence outside the neighborhood where we lived. Was beaten up a few times. We had a lot of break-ins. Break-ins like burglaries were really common. So we had bars by the end, we had bars on the windows. We had locks on the inside of doors. So if someone broke into the kitchen and we were asleep in the bedroom, we could wake up and just lock ourselves in the bedroom. So they could ransack the house but not kind of reach us. And I have many memories of, like, I used to sleep in mum's bed a lot till I was about 13 because I was scared. And I have this memory of lying beside her and just a torch coming through the window, through the curtain, and moving around the whole room, and the terror and the heart, like, and the terror, and then the torch landing on our faces, so you knew they could see. And just that, like, slow motion. And I have memories of police coming and choppers overhead. And yeah, that sounds dramatic, but actual choppers. Like, there were times where it got pretty close to the bone. Like when I was 8, someone tried to rape mum in front of me. They broke in, and his job to get into a gang. He was only young. He was maybe 18. He wanted to get into a gang, and to do that, he had a task. He had to rape somebody in front of their child. So it was pretty intense. Now he didn't, because I called the police. I can still remember being on the phone to the police, and mum was on the bed and he was beating her on the bed, and she was saying, don't hurt my baby, please, just don't. Like, she loved me so much. It was always about me. And that's the thing about mum, like, she wouldn't have new shoes, but I would have shoes, right? If I remember when I started bleeding as a woman, like, she would wrap up rags for herself to use, but I always had the proper hygiene things. Even though she didn't have money for that, she somehow made that work, So she was beautiful, resourceful, intelligent, and, like all of us, wounded, grieving. So even inside the house was sometimes really hard for me because she had kind of some mental health stuff. She had a lot on her shoulders. So I was lost, and I didn't feel deeply connected to or deeply seen. And it was just her and I. There weren't siblings. There was no dad. My father left when she was pregnant. So I found myself in this neighborhood it felt to me like a place I just didn't fit. I always had the sense I'm in the wrong place. It's like I got dropped off somewhere, and I was like, the way people think, the way they do things, I was always like, why? I don't understand. I'm in the wrong place. But I had to be there, right? I'm a kid. And and I would be like this little bouncy, joyful, but there was so much pain and grief, and mum's rockiness. I kind of had to orbit her moods and her. I was always sensing and feeling, and there's a lot in that. But I also love mum, so I don't want to kind of say too much on that either, because I love her and she's grown a lot too. And I'm a mother now, and I know how hard it is to raise a kid. So all that to say, there was nowhere to go. We didn't even have a car till I was 14. Really went nowhere. So I would reach for God. I would feel this yearning for connection.
Mhm.
And mum went to religion when I was about 7 or 8. Baptist religion. It might have been slightly earlier, I can't remember. But there was a church up the road. It was pretty intense. And I loved church. Like my hands would get hot and I'd feel all this energy. And I'd be there worshipping, like, yes, yes, like reaching to God. And at Sunday school, I used to like get up and like give little sermons and stuff. And I used to have friends come stay, and I'd try to tell them like Jesus loves you, and I'd like tell them like you can let Jesus into your heart, and I'd try and convert them on these little sleepovers. So funny. So I was always resonant with this, but I didn't link it to dogma or religion. And I remember mum saying things like, there's some things that are bad, right? Like abortion's bad, or being gay is bad, or all of this. And I would say, no, mama, it's not. God loves. And it just didn't compute for me. So I couldn't speak to her even about this. So where I would go was up. I would go to God. I would sit, we would have had another burglary, or I was hungry, or I was just hungry in my famine, like there was famine in my heart, right? For connection, to be seen, to be held, to be known, to know, I couldn't get there with mum, and that was the only person around. I had my little friends, but I also couldn't get there with them because a lot of them had a very different life. So I would reach to God, and I just could feel God immediately. It wasn't even a thought, it was an experience that I just knew. My system would go there, and I would pull God into me, and I would say, be with me, support me. I need strength. That was my call often. Or if I was afraid, I was often afraid because of the burglaries, and I would say, protect me, never let harm come, and I felt God never let harm come to me. I really felt that, and that was true. We had all of these close calls. We had people break in and destroy our things and bash them with bats and poo on our beds and all sorts of crazy things. But actual harm to me physically never came. Which is kind of a miracle because people knew it was just me and mum there. They knew it was two women alone. So we were like sitting ducks. There was no man in the house to protect, and they knew that, right? Anyway, so God came. So that was my connection. And it was almost like it's such a gift. If we look at it with just our eyes, we see, the hunger or the isolation. When you look at it from from spirit, we see that it's such a gift to be born into a body that has that isolation, that has the opportunity so young to call to God, to know God, to bring God into the body, and to see how God will always support me, how like life is so benevolent, it brings me what I need. And I had that chance.
Yeah, I
I had
resonate
that
a lot with what you said with how I think we're all awake coming in. And,
mm,
it's said that it takes 7 years for the soul to kind of integrate into the body, where we're fairly kind of subconscious till then, but I think more in tuned, right? And yet
yeah.
you're describing vividly after 8 years old, after that period of time, still being a heightened sense of awareness, connection. And so was there a particular moment this felt certain, or did it just seem to always be there? Grad
Always,
oh,
always. I had this sense of trust, and we didn't have many books. We didn't have a TV most of the time. Occasionally, we'd get this bunged out old secondhand TV, and then I remember coming home one day. Mum was like, "I sold the TV. We needed some food," and I'd be like, "Nah, okay." So I didn't really have any conditioning. It's super weird. It's really unique. But even music. Like, mum wasn't really a music person. I didn't have a dad playing tunes from the 60s, like there wasn't music literature. I had the odd book. I was a bit obsessed with Vietnam War books for a long time because they were all in the op shops in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. But books, music, art, I didn't go to exhibitions. We couldn't afford anything. We didn't leave much. We didn't even go on really camping trips or it's like an ashram. So what a gift that isolation kind of was. It was like this, I call it like a welfare child ashram. And as I say that, the funniest thing is that came into my head a while back. It's a welfare child ashram. And I had to Google ashram to know what that actually was. I was like, what is that? Oh yeah, I am right. That is it. So I have this sense in me, but I often like the mind has to catch up. I don't really know what that word, but I know what it means now, but I had to. But yeah, so
That's wild.
I don't know. I never really spoke about it that much. Like as I got older, as I developed into like early teens, and I played it cool, I was doing my, but deep in me that I was always talking to God.
Wow.
I was always asking for help and strength. And I think we are always guided and we're always given that help. It's just we forget to ask. But I had to ask because I was lost and
Yeah.
scared.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us don't think to ask because we so early on, I know for me, fairly conventional upbringing, it was immediate of, trying to get ahead in school and the focus was like education. So whether it's that or just kind of get by making ends meet, like getting to work, like one of the like there's other programming, I guess you could call it, where that's just where the mind kind of starts going when we start becoming conscious. But for you,
Yeah.
it remained open. And so funny enough, there was a quote that actually stood out when I was reading this book by St. John the Cross, and he said, for starters, he describes that there's kind of three periods of the dark night. How there's kind of when the sun is starting to go down, and there's like midnight, there's like the real darkness, and then there is, closer to when dawn is happening, where it's starting to lighten up. And that beginning period when the sun's starting to go down, that kind of first darkness you could describe, he described as the dark night of the intellect. And the quote he specifically said was, only those who set aside their own knowledge and walk in service like unlearned children receive wisdom from God, spirit, universe, however you connect. And so I think
Wow.
so just hearing your story at first, I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. So early on, I felt that just had that. I have a hunch maybe in a past life of some sort of previous work for ashram to come about, but there was this openness from the beginning, and
Yeah.
it was that.
And I want to thank my mum for that because actually, because she's so sensitive and she was the black sheep of the family, my mother never bought into conditioning. Like, she never gave me messaging. It was the two of us in a house, right?
Hmm.
She never gave me messaging from culture. Like, you need to be a lawyer, you need to be a doctor. If you want to be successful and you want to be loved by me, you have to do X, Y, Z. Like, her love was never conditional. My mother loved, she had all these things, right? This roughness, this wounding. She would yell, she would scream. It wasn't perfect. But she loved me more than she hated herself. And she loved me completely. So I grew up with that love kind of filling me, that sense that because our mothers are God, right? Our parents are God. Our parents are life. So if they love us unconditionally, then we can surrender and we can trust because we feel somewhere in our bodies that life loves us unconditionally. Like it's buried in my bones, the sense that God loves me unconditionally too, because she did. The imprint on this body was that, and you're talking about this unknowing and this openness. Well, I had that because I didn't have this idea that I have to be super skinny, I have to be a lawyer or a doctor or do something to be of worth. I really had this freedom of conditioning. Like when I went into university when I was 18, I finally got spat out into the world and I went to university and I was really surprised. Like it was funny things. Like I didn't know how to turn on a computer for starters. Like I had to really learn things like that. but there were many things that I saw with these fresh eyes. Like, people had come from all over New Zealand to do this degree, right? And I could see how much they wanted to get A's or kind of succeed. They were hurting themselves. They were like, I am not a worthy person or a good person or a lovable person unless I do some things. And I have a list of things I have to do and be. And I would watch this and be like, huh. And I didn't have that sense. So I had this freedom. I got into the world and I was like, wow, I've got my own money. I can buy food. Everything felt like a gift. Like, I get to eat every day, and I don't want to pretend we didn't eat every day. Like, most of the time we had food, but it wasn't much, and sometimes there was no food and blah. And so I had food and I was learning, and I got C's. I got consistent C's at university, and I did it deliberately. I was like, no, because I'm going to spend enough time to kind of get by, and then the rest, like, I get to live, and the joy of that. And so that lack of conditioning and the unknowing, it was from the ashram, but it was from Mum too. She didn't impose ideals on me. And so there's a big piece for all of us, I think, humbly, in our spiritual growth, where there comes a time where we have to reclaim our own sense of what we need, what we value, and what we want to do with our lives. And we have to stop finding that from the external gaze, whether that's what our parents value, culture values, our boyfriend values. We have to bring it here. Go, no, what do I know to be of value for me? What brings me joy? What lights me up? What's my contribution? And that's where we can find our gifts and really allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to, to be and to breathe and to live and to live these precious lives that we have.
For sure. Gosh, well, I think that does just give so much context for when we do start reaching, through awakening or in this dark period, because like you said, there's aloneness where we don't have that natural support and love being given. We have to move away from our family and friends a lot of times to give ourselves that space. And it's such an unknown territory. It's really hard to navigate. And so before getting there, actually, though, I thought a portion of your story that's also very relatable is funny enough, you going back into the world. And I know a lot occurred, you being able to work at I believe as an anchor or with news channel of some sort. And yet I think a part that a lot of us go through is a different type of darkness, not quite the dark night of the soul, because that ended up being later on, but still a long period of time where you were ill and having cleansed a lot. I mean, you weren't able to get, if you could describe that, because I think that's also a period.
So I'll quickly track it. So I went into the world, I did my degree. It wasn't always easy. There were hard times. When I was about 20, I had an awakening, which I didn't recognize as an awakening because I didn't know any of this stuff existed. I started seeing spirits, and I had like really mystical experiences and things going on. And I was just so happy to be in the world that I kind of continued with life, and I ended up finishing my degree. And I would have these prophetic dreams. I was scared, like, I'd done this degree and it took everything I had. I worked a couple of jobs, and I was so poor when I was doing my degree. I had glasses that were taped up when they broke. I had like tape on the side of my glasses, and everyone would tease me, and I was like, I don't care. There was an ease in it, but also pain in it. And so I got through, and I wasn't getting a job, and had a prophetic dream where, I'd often have this where guides would walk with me, and it wasn't like a dream. I'm in a different place. Like, I actually experienced coming out of my body and sitting with them, and they said, it's fine, you're going to get a really good job. Like, relax, breathe, it's okay. And then they told me a bunch of other things that were going to happen, and it all came true. And I did. I managed, magic things would happen, and I got this job as a junior reporter at our local TV station, and had to make coffee and give out newspapers, but also did things on TV. Did stories, covered amazing stories, but I wanted to change the world. I had this kind of blazing heart from everything I'd seen and been through. I was about 21 at that point, and I started to see, wait, journalism is so that they can get ads on TV. Like the ads come first. It's not actually the programming. And I have a deep respect for journalism, and they're amazing journalists, but it was like a 3-minute story, and we were told to try and make people cry or, dramatize it. And I was like, this is not where I need to be. So I left, and everyone thought I was nuts. I just jumped, and people were like, it was our main news channel in New Zealand and national news channel, and everybody, my friends were working in juice bars, and people were like, you're leaving? Like, why would you do that? And I just was like, I need to. So I had a lot of time in my life where the logical choice, I didn't make it. Right? Culture was saying you're successful if you're a TV journalist. Like, I would have makeup, I would have a suit, I had cars to pick me up from my house and bring me to work and for security, things like this. And at night time when I was working, and it was madness. But I knew deep inside that this isn't real for me. I don't feel it's nourishing. I don't feel it's doing what I need to do. So it was always checking with that internal gaze, checking with source, checking with that quiet, true voice that lives in all of us, that guiding us. So I jumped. Yeah, and I went overseas. I met an Irish boy, and we fell in love, and I went to Ireland, and I had 10 years in Europe, and I ended up working for big international aid agencies, NGOs, where I traveled, and I went to orphanages, and I worked, and sometimes I was in the office stuffing envelopes, and we did all of it. But I did that, and I loved that work. I was on fire for that work. Years later, I could see I was trying to rescue the orphan inside me, really. But that's another story, I think. So I was going out trying to change things, and that's what I was doing at that time. But I was in London, and I was working really hard in that place. But in many ways, I was hiding in my 20s, in early 30s. I was offered promotion after promotion in these roles, and I wouldn't take them because I was a bit afraid to really be. I would work really hard, but kind of quietly. I was in a relationship that wasn't really true. So it was kind of the first time in my life in London. I'd always made these decisions that had been true. I'd taken big risks. I'd listened to the quiet knowing inside. I'd let that compass guide me. But for this period in London, I didn't do that. I was like, I don't want to leave my relationship. That's too scary. I'm staying. I don't want to leave my job. That's too scary. So I went into this period of that place. I was out partying a lot, drinking and there's nothing wrong with that. We all have joy, and we do. I still party now, but just in a different way. It's from a really authentic, joyful place. But back then it was a way of numbing and hiding. And then we went home to New Zealand after 10 years doing that, and I got extremely sick, which is what you're mentioning. It was literally the minute I got home. It was something like 2 weeks after arriving home. I completely lost my voice. I had bones hurting. Like, I was so ill. Headaches. I got so weak I couldn't get out of bed. I was pretty much in bed for about 4 months. I could get out and do the odd trip. I could eat. But I remember being in bed and lifting up my arm, and it was so heavy that I couldn't lift it. I remember looking at people talking to me, and they would kind of animated, and I would look at the muscles on their face moving and think, they don't realize how much energy it takes to move their face. And my pastor with the same Irishman, it had been something like 10 years or even longer, and he had to wash me because I couldn't even shower, a few times there, and it was scary. I had been vibrant, I had been full of life, and I had no idea whether I was going to get better. I had no idea what was happening to my body. I went to every doctor, every naturopath, every specialist. Nobody, they could see certain markers. Your white blood count's really high, so we see you're fighting things, but we don't know what it is. And that was it. I went everywhere, tried everything, didn't have even the resource or the energy to do that, but had to, right? And so you're stuck in this place and you're terrified. In the end, I tell my partner to go out, go see your friends, go do things, because it was like coming up to 6 months, 8 months, and I was still like this. And I would just lay in bed all day, and I would sometimes have a bath or find strength, but I couldn't walk down my street. I was so ill. And I had a lot of mystical experiences happened at this time too. Like I really, and I still had no idea of like spirituality as a concept or a community. I didn't know that there were like communities or teach. I just didn't. I don't know how. I thought meditating was for like hippie, like they do, like those people in tie-dye t-shirts do that. I just didn't have a concept. I loved deeply. I loved, and I had this burning in me for people and life, and that's why I did the aid works. I needed a place to put my love, but I didn't. There were no concepts. But I often had these mystical experiences, and I just kept them to myself. And so when I was really sick, like one that stands out and I still think of, I left my body and I kind of came to, and I was in blackness, and everything was black. And I was black. It was just darkness, and I was that. But what I am, like what's looking out of Ryan's eyes, like what you might think it's the mind or the being, but it's not. It's just what you are. I was that still. It remained, but yet I was blackness. And I looked around for a body with my hand. It felt like my hand, but there was no hand. Maybe with the mind. The mind sought the body, the physical form, nothing. I couldn't remember gender or person. I knew I was supposed to be somebody. Like, who am I? I know I'm someone. And I couldn't. And I looked around for infrastructure or like something around me, nothing. It's blackness, and I am that. And then I got scared, like a little fear came in, and then poof, I kind of went back into the body that was lying on the bed ill. And I went through the head, like that was so clear. I went through the head, and the body sat up, and it was like I was in the body. And as I entered the body, the room around me sprung up like a hologram. I mean, literally, like the walls went like that. The bed came up. I could see that. And then I knew myself. It's like I have a location. It's not, everything's not black. I have a location, time, space, and I could see. And then I remembered all at once. This all happened in a moment. It wasn't linear. But I'm Lucy. I have parents. And there was like this relief of like, I have an identity. Oh yeah, I'm doing something. I'm here. Anyway, that's stayed with me a lot. That sense of like, I'm not the body. I'm not, and these experiences would happen, and yet there was no cognitive understanding. It was just an imprint on my being. Like, I'm not the body. I know I'm not, because I'm out of the body, right? And I'm still me. Things like this. But it was scary. I've had a lot of people get in touch with me and say that they're sick and terrified, and I know that place. I know that place because now I'm better, but I didn't know that I was going to be better. I couldn't speak. I couldn't connect.
Right.
Anyway, over time, like I got offered a job out of the blue, headhunted, and it was my dream. And so I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So I went, I'd sent them my CV earlier, and then they had kept it for a while, and a job had come up. And I think it's probably divine timing, because I did go to the interview and I got the job. I kind of collapsed at home after the interview. Like, how did I do that? And I did, and I managed to push it out some months until I had to actually go and do the job. And then once I was there, I would work, and I would just collapse in the evenings. So this went on for about 2 years. I was working, but I would collapse in the evenings. All weekend I was in bed. I mean, all weekend. Like, occasionally I'd be like to my partner, let's go out. People have been invited out by friends. I'll try. And it was a funny period of real loneliness, because my friends, God love them, they didn't know what to do with me. So they kind of disappeared. And, I was new back to New Zealand. I had been in Europe 10 years. So there weren't those deep bonds where they would just lie with me, in fetal position and cry with me. I didn't have those friends around. They were all in London because they were all the ones I was making open. So I found myself really alone. I had some family members, really amazing, but on the whole, I was alone again. So I had to go to God. I was on my knees. I was on my ass. I was like, come, but the interesting thing is I remember this because this wasn't the dark night of soul. This was extreme suffering, like childhood in many ways. There was deep suffering, but I still had the light in me, like I could still feel it. So I remember I have a vivid memory of like, I'm going to walk, but I'm going to have to start practicing like proper walking, right? This is before the job started. So I would say I just got to get to the end of my block. So I'd shuffle outside and I'd walk down the street really slowly, like the energy to like move the muscles was just like, people called it chronic fatigue or ME, and it was kind of the syndrome. They had no idea what it was, so they'd shove me in that box. And I kind of sensed it was never that. Maybe I picked something up on my travels in Thailand, or maybe it's just I had some thoughts about it later. But I'm shuffling down the street, and I remember the sun coming out, and I remember feeling the light of my being still. I was like, it's so funny. The body is in so much agony, the headaches, the bones, but I feel light in my belly. I feel my light. And I remember that, which was really different to the dark, what I think of as the dark night now, because there was no light in that place. I couldn't feel God. It was so different. But yeah, I did heal eventually, and my partner and I ended up healing. And I want to say this for anyone who's listening who's sick. Yeah. I ended up healing by letting go of needing to know, by really deeply accepting it, and by researching myself, nutrition, and just really using food to support my body. So I came into this place of my body's intelligent. It was a process to get here. My body knows what to do to heal. I just need to give it, it's a co-creation. I just need to give it the circumstances that it needs. So good food, lots of rest. And I was vigilant with food. I mean, no, I had never thought about it. I'd never been that way, but it was vegetables and, good, whole, organic, if I could, not always, water and probiotics. And I just went that route and gave it what it needed, like baths and Epsom salts and things like this, like really supported it to heal. And I've seen other people be sick since around me. And I took it for granted that everyone would do that. I stopped. I didn't have any alcohol. I didn't, blah, blah, blah. But I've seen a lot of people around me who don't necessarily do that. That they do keep hurting their bodies, and the body's crying out for us to kind of agree with it. And I have zero judgment in that, because I would have moments where I was like, oh my God, fuck this, and I'd eat a whole chocolate cake, and then I get really, really sick. So like we all have our craziness, and like I really have that craziness too. But on the whole, that's how I healed. I healed just by supporting my body. And yeah.
You just brought me back so much to, because for starters, for everyone listening, I think it helps so much to hear that for such a long period of time too. Again, you had the connection before to kind of help some assurance, and during as well, but a lot of people don't. And I think they can have a strong sense of going crazy. What's wrong with me? I'm broken. And I know for me, funny enough, also had a developing high white blood count, starting to think of an autoimmune condition, because I was fibromyalgia, it was feeling like lupus at a certain point where just everything would ache. And God, it's just this, I think it's funny the timing that you described this, because this was when this was the most immersed in the world, you would say. Sounded like you were going out a lot in London, kind of drinking, and then this kind of forced you out of that. And I felt for me, as brutal as it was, that was the grace, because I had no choice. I could no longer do these desires. And so funny enough, with the overlapping, the quote that this period of dark night is, because it's not necessarily a dark night of the soul, right? It's like a dark night of the body where we're
Yeah.
way.
Mm.
And the quote that was given for this was, to deprive oneself of the gratifications of the appetites in all things is like living in darkness and in a void. Appetite, attachment, affection, love of creatures, the will for something, inclination, desire. And I think in a lot of sense, we're holding on to these things. And as painful as it is, it appears to have had some type of reasoning. And so
Wow, that's incredible. I love that you've put this together. Like that you see that, like the correlation, because it's so true. It certainly marries with my experience as I listen to you.
that's what
Because
I was
after this,
when
yeah, it was
I heard your story, like this is right here. Yeah.
it's amazing. And it's probably no coincidence you're reading that book at the same time. And so it's afterwards that I put that together. Afterwards, at the time I was like, have I, whatever, you're asking all these questions. But afterwards, looking back, I was like, once I had these big blowing opens, it was like the body needed to clean. Lucy had to let go of everything that she thought made her up. And when I was sick, it was part of that. The dark night was far deeper. And for some, being sick is the dark night. It just happens that for me, it wasn't quite yet, it was a different, but you can't, the friends fall away, the nice clothes fall away, going out and being a person, because you don't even have the energy to move the muscles on your face. So how can you tell a good joke? The persona, it falls down, and you're asked to just be. You can't get out of bed. And looking back, I'd never meditated, right? But looking back, that few years when I was so ill, and I mean, I was ill for 5 or 6 years, and I still get ill now if I don't eat properly. So it's still here 10 years later, but it's managed. But those 2 years where I was really in bed a lot, it's like meditation. It was like I was just lying there, and I didn't call it meditation, but it was. And things came up for healing. So it's kind of links into your quote there, where like we're asked to relinquish so much, and we're asked to just be when we're ill.
Yeah.
No more can we? Yeah.
Well, I think what's encouraging is there is support during this period of time. Our next episode is actually going to be on Ayurveda, holistic medicine more, and that's what helped me, which is really the food and the herbs. And I was depriving myself so much of what I was needing. I was thinking fat was bad, and my joints were cracking and breaking, and I needed to have a lot more fats, and it was just helped me. Yeah, that'll be for another time.
That's
But
amazing you say a lot more fats, because I was the same. And I'm curious about this. People have started writing about chronic fatigue and the link with spiritual awakening. Dr. Patrick Miller actually sent me an article he wrote about this, the link with chronic fatigue and spiritual awakening.
hey, everyone, real quick, we are going to be going more into how to help support the body during periods of awakening in our next episode. But since it was mentioned here, I thought it'd be worth mentioning a few things that have helped me during periods of time like this. No, it's not going to solve the dark night of the soul, but it can help take the edge off in periods of time like this. Especially how Lucy's mentioning the mind-body connection. When thoughts are racing and can't be settled, then it's going to start manifesting pain in the body. And so that's why grounding is a big focus, is very important. And this formula has really helped me. It's Mycro Calm. It's an Ayurvedic blend of ashwagandha oil and kava, which is a South Pacific root. So you're able to just put a few drops into water or tea or directly, and it can help calm things down, bring things down earth a little bit. And secondly is, as Lucy was also mentioning, we can't always renounce work and our responsibilities, unfortunately. So when we do have to get work done and feeling foggy and needing clear thoughts, clear mind, then I found this to be helpful. It's a microflow formula to stay focused, has MCT oil, lion's mane, to help give clear thought when we have to get work done. And lastly is, if you are having to use a lot of stimulants to kind of get through the day, then I found this to be helpful to replace coffee, considering it can increase anxiety, have a hard time sleeping. So this is a microactive formula, motivation formula. A little dangerous just because it does taste pretty good. It tastes like cacao and cinnamon and a date syrup, but helps to lessen some of the side effects of stimulants that we have to take a lot of times. So hopefully it helps. But for now, we'll get back to Lucy here.
It's common, and when I didn't know any of this, but people have since told me, since I did my Buddha at the gas pump interview, that Ajay Shanti had huge illnesses. Like, he was trying to be a cyclist, a sportsman, and that's what he would do, and then he would get sick. And it's like life is course correcting us, right? You talked about, you were trying to, it's like life is like, this is not for you. And if you won't listen, because when I was in London, I knew it wasn't for me what I was doing, but I was not listening. Like, I remember being like 10 a.m. on a Saturday with a cigarette and whiskey on my stoop in London, like thinking, what am I doing? It's 10 a.m. I'm like, it didn't feel good. It didn't align with what blah, blah, blah. But I still kept going. So if we don't listen, I think there's something in that. Life just goes, you're needed here.
Yeah.
We're going to stop you. And Rick from Buddha at the Gas Pump mentioned to me that St. Francis of Assisi was also really, really ill. And there's been a lot of people who they experience this illness, because my sense is the vessel needs to clean. Like, we need to course correct on our life, but also to really, once the light comes, it spares nothing. And to really be able to embody this consciousness, to live it here, the vessel, the body has to be able to, clean a bit. If we're drinking and we're having Diet Coke, and I was like a whiskey Diet Coke person, and I mean, that's truck cleaner. And there is something in that, right? That the consciousness can't express in the same way when the body is thick and sluggish and tired. Like, we can't really. Now we have to align the body, the psyche, the emotional body, all of it, and then we get that really clear, beautiful expression. Yeah.
No, the health will be a big part of it. We're luckily addressing that next episode more. And funny enough, 3 for 3 here, the transition into Dark Night of the Soul, a quote he had, St. John the Cross, for this period of time where it's, again, dark night, purification of the senses, of appetites. Quote he said was, no matter how severe the purification, it is still the work of God's gentle hand, clearing away the debris of inordinate affection and making room for the divine light. To speak on that purification process, we're saying. And so that's Dark Night of the Body. Now getting into Dark Night of the Soul, where it's a dark place. There's nothing to grasp for, right? You can't go back to the world. You've kind of already been there, done that. I've learned your lesson. No more whiskey and Coke. And you're also losing this lack of connection too. And you're just like, what the heck is going on? And you're just stuck. You're in limbo. There's nowhere to go. You just literally only thing you can do is endure, really. And so if you could detail that period of time, because I know people in that period, it's very hard to navigate.
It's insane. And I didn't know any of this conceptually. I had no idea about Dark Nights of the Soul. That came later. So all I knew is I'm just in hell. That's what I knew. And hell and heaven, it's a state, right? It's a state. We can have that here. So I had a little girl. I had a baby. And I had been sick, and then I got married, and we settled in a home on a tropical island. And I had a relative period of kind of happiness, and I think of it now probably like a rest in between suffering.
Give her a break. Just one moment.
And I had a prophetic dream again, and they said a little girl was coming, and they were very somber, the person telling me. And it's such a vivid dream. It's not like a dream, right? It's happening. And they said, a little girl is coming, prepare yourself. And I remember thinking, why is she so somber? Like, a little girl it's a beautiful thing. And then she said, you're going to Europe, you need to let go of some things, or you never will. And I woke up thinking, I'm not going to Europe. We just bought a house. We can't afford that. And I went into work, and my boss said, we need to send you to Barcelona for work. And I knew, oh my God, I'm having a little girl, right? Because it was the things. And my pregnancy was wonderful. I was painting, I was all that. But the minute Rose came, I don't know what happened. I don't know if the birth was really intense. So I don't know if on her way out, she hit some energy center. I've often wondered that. Or triggered, it was like day and night. As soon as she came out of my body, And it was beautiful. I managed it. It was something like 40 hours, like a whole working week of laboring. It was huge. But I managed it. I felt powerful. I did it. It was painful, but it was fine. I did it. But as soon as I had her in my arms, I couldn't feel love. I couldn't. I was like, oh my God, I'm this loving. Everyone had said you're going to be the most amazing mother. You're the most loving, blah. I was, I expected that too, but I had this baby and I couldn't feel her. I was just like, who? I don't, like, and what? And then we're at home and she was very sick. She had severe reflux. Anyone who's a mother or a parent gets this. I've had so many messages from parents going, oh my God, this is what it's actually like. People don't talk about this. There was no day, no night. Suddenly, I was 35, I'd gone from being free, working a job I loved, feeling useful in the world. I was stuck at home all day, all night. My husband got to go to work. He's an amazing dad, but he had to work. We have to pay the bills, right? And I had the boobs, so I'm breastfeeding, so I have to do it. And she was waking at points every half an hour at night, every hour. And then I was awake, and I can't even give words to it. I mean, you know me well enough now. I did not have a vanilla life or an easy life. I don't think anyone does. It just looks different on the outside to everyone. But I'd endured a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. I was resilient, grew up in the hood. Nothing compared to motherhood for me. Motherhood brought me to my knees. This child could never be put down. She would cry constantly because she was burning, but we didn't know that at the time. She got diagnosed later. We were in and out of hospital. She'd get sick. I couldn't breathe. She was on me and with me and pulling at me and crying and constantly. And it was just, I didn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't shower because she couldn't be put down. And at this time, to make this fast, I don't want to glaze over the suffering, but I want to make it fast. My family didn't understand, right? My family were from a different generation where you leave babies in the crib to cry and scream and they just fall asleep eventually. Now, we do it maybe a bit differently. Some people still do that, and I totally honor that. That's cool. I think we know what's best for our own children, so I just honor that. But I couldn't do that to Rose. Everything in me knew that was not what she needed. She was sick and in pain. She needed love. So here I was, empty of love, needing to give love. And I'm almost crying when I say this and I had just moved to this new house in this town. I had no friends. It was a different location we were living in. I used to commute on a boat to work, so even my workmates were across an ocean. And my family, they were like, you need to I was a shadow of myself. I wasn't sleeping. I was hallucinating, all of it. And they were like, you need to put her in the crib at 7 p.m. and just leave her to cry and leave her all night and pick her up and then the doctors were saying, you can't do that. She's got reflux, she's vomiting, she'll choke herself, right? But the family, they didn't understand. And so then I kind of lost them because they were like, we can't show up for whatever reason. They couldn't show up for me in that time. So I was really alone. My husband was at work and I really was in a house, often like trying to get her to nap because she would lose her shit if she didn't sleep. So all the curtains shut, the white noise on, and I was this crazy like, please sleep. So she would have been picking up my energy. Anyway, for the first time, I mean, when she was 3 months old, I wanted to commit suicide. I remember, and I had never been that guy. I had always felt joy, but I remember being on her bedroom floor, her nursery floor, the most beautiful nursery. It's so ridiculous. I had shipped a rug from the US. I had painted them. The nursery looked like Pinterest gone wild, like on steroids. It was so beautiful because I'd been a poor girl, right? And I was like, I'm going to give my baby the most beautiful bedroom. So here I am, a complete mess, weeping on her floor in a heap because she wouldn't sleep. And I was so exhausted. 3 months of cumulative, not sleeping. And I was like, I can't do it. And I meant it. I was saying like to God, I can't do this. Like, this is too much. It's too much. And I thought, I'm going to kill myself. I have to. And I was having these visions of killing her. Like, it's not easy to say that. It feels horrendous, but many of us have that. It's almost the animal body in us is like in protection. Like, I have to eat and sleep, and otherwise I'm going to die. So I have to kill her. And then I was like, okay, I have to kill me. It's where my crazy mind went. And it's not easy to say that, but then I had this logical thinking of, well, I don't want to kill me because she will suffer. I don't want her to suffer. I want her to have a mother. Therefore, I'm going to say I'm dead, but I'll stay alive for her because I am dead. This is no life. I don't want this life. I don't want to be a mother. I was Googling like regretting having children, the rage of motherhood. I was going into the car, shutting the door and screaming, like, let me out. It's like every wound from childhood that I had not been able to process. That little girl who for 13 years was in the hood, left alone, with quite an overwhelming primary relationship, but couldn't speak that overwhelm. And this is me looking back. I didn't know this at the time. I had to bury all that pain and suffering and just be, right? And I had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress when I was living in London and seeing a psychotherapist. And I did a lot of healing at that time. But when I had the baby, it was me alone in a house with an overwhelming relationship. It was the perfect simulation to bring up everything I hadn't processed from the original relationship. And boy, did it tear me in pieces. It brought me to my knees. I became someone who, I yelled, I screamed at her when she was a few months old, like, why won't you sleep? It was horrendous. It was the worst moment of my life. I can still see her little face. And she threw up. She was so afraid, and I'm deliberately owning this and saying, like, I was a monster, but I wasn't. I was beautiful and divine, but I was consumed with pain and wound like all of us. And so I found myself in this place, and I didn't kill myself because I said, let's just pretend I did. And yet she can keep me, and I'll just be the mother. So I would cook, clean, look after her, and I would think I'm already dead. Like, I might as well be here. And I hated it. I would weep. I would rage. My poor husband at the time, he had his own stuff. He wasn't perfect, there was a lot of disconnect and blah, blah, blah. But also he tried so hard and he didn't know what to do. And I was a different person. So this went on and on for months, and no sleep. And I couldn't feel God. All my life, no matter what had happened, I could feel God. I could feel a thread. But I would reach for God, and I had always had guidance and hearing. I could hear things. I could feel the quiet voice inside. None of that. It was all gone. It was pure black. I remember just when you're in that space, I've talked to a lot of people about this since, everything goes wrong, right? Like, you take the baby to the car, you're like, I'm going to go out in the sun, I'll get a coffee, I'll try and make it good, I'll try and find some good. And the tire's blowing, or you're like, it was like when you're in that, it's like as if everything is so hard, like you can't. I have such compassion for people in that place, because it's almost like reality warps to be that hard. People will say unkind things, and they're so deep, and all our friends disappear because we're obviously not that fun to be around. The whole thing. So about 8 months old, I was in her nursery, another day of day nights all a blur, nothing's nothing, everything's everything, whatever. And I'm rocking her. And I had kept saying to God all this time, why are you doing, pleading, why, in my heart, out loud, why are you doing this to me? It was like my mantra all day, all night. Why? So I'm in the nursery, and I say it again, and she's a big baby, she's 9. And I thought, I'm not going to get a reply. I didn't expect one. I didn't care. You know, there've been so many times I've just said, oh, you're a cunt to God, like just leave me, just I don't care, you know. And I had her on my shoulder. And for some reason, my mind said, why are you doing this to me? I can't, this is too much. And I heard out of nowhere, I heard, and I want to caveat this because the words now to me would seem cheesy and bullshit. But this is what I heard, and I knew none of this language. I heard to give you the opportunity to transcend your ego. I heard that, and I know transcend your ego. Oh, so I'm cringing, but that is what I heard. And I said, ego, like I didn't know what that meant. And I said, I'm not arrogant. What are you talking about? Part of me was like, I have been pretty arrogant, actually. Maybe they're criticizing me, like I'm bad or I'm wrong. I didn't understand ego as a spiritual kind of concept or anything. And so I was like, I don't have it. And I said, if you're not going to talk to me, just go away. You know, just I actually think I said fuck off. But something like that. And they did. I had felt the presence there that I'd always felt my whole life. And then whoosh, it was like it was gone and I was cold again. But I never forgot those words. It kind of stayed with me. Thank God I didn't know I still had another. It wasn't until she was like 2.5 or something that it all changed for me. So I had a good 2.5 years of this. I don't even know what to say. It was horrendous.
Well, for starters, thank you, just because, I mean, that's being able to tell the honest truth of exactly what was occurring on your mind, especially because I'm sure there's a lot of shame involved during this period of time, people having similar feelings, especially if they're a mother, especially if they have family or responsibilities. And I imagine there's just such shame, but it's real. It's what's being felt. And there's just conceding all of it by the end of it. I mean, it's, I can imagine. So thank you. Thank you so much for being able to share that. I imagine there's a lot of people on the other side very much appreciating this of sharing this. So thank you. So gosh, 2.5 years, especially after 2 years of not even being able to get out of bed before. I mean, this is a marathon of purification for sure. And so
Yeah.
2.5.
Yeah, and actually, that's the point, the purification, because I couldn't go to work. That was what the quote that you talked about before, where we strip away all identification. Looking back, that period of motherhood was that. Like, I could no longer be the girl in the cool, trendy clothes, chatting. I would try and go to a mother's group, and they're all baking and shit. And I was like, I haven't even brushed my teeth. Like, I could let alone string a sentence together. I lost my work that I loved, you know, my job, and I lost my how I looked, and I lost even being the bright one, the nice one, the kind of the light. My mum had always said, "You're the light. You're the light of my life. You're the light." And I couldn't even be the light. I was like, I'm not the light. I was, yeah. So every single identification I had, my figure, my fitness, everything went away. Yeah.
It's profound, and spirituality is not easy. A lot of times it's described as light and love, and it's to get to that place of pure love and light. I mean, this is a lot of it, and it's not just in one life. I think this is for many periods of time that we're having to let go of desires and to purify ourselves. And it's, you can question so much, like, why is this happening? Why now? What is the point of all this? And I think, maybe we asked for it before coming into this incarnation to an extent, but because I think we know, I mean, as the Buddha said, life is suffering. And so and I think you would describe this too in aligning yourself with spirit, how even though you had this like dream job or you wanted to go this place, you would let it go because you knew it wasn't going to serve you in the end. And just to have that strength, I mean, that fortitude, going through it myself, I feel that there is this sense of remembrance, almost a remembrance of just yearning and longing and going through this time and time and time again, not just this go around, but and it just is so deep inside you when you get to that place, and it's almost like shredding it all there. And then it's like, I don't want to go through this anymore. And it's not just the pain of the dark night, but just all of it, right? You have to shed all of it. And so it's a deep surrender. And if you could detail that for us, because it appeared to have miraculous moment of light finally coming in. So that light end of the tunnel.
And I do want to caveat this by saying it's, for me, my experience is it's never been the end. That was the big one, I hope. But I don't know. Maybe there's more, right? And I seem to like the dark patch and then the light, and then there will be another blowing open. And so you mentioned before to get to love and light. And I think to get to love and light is really important, but we have to include the dark. We have to own all of us to be there. And so that darkness was wanting to be seen. It was already in me. It was part of me, and so it had to birth, it had to come out. So this few years of owning that and being that, it was necessary. The sacred mess, the sacred process that happens with all of us. So a few months, 2.5 years, and I started reading a parenting book called Conscious Parenting by Shefali Sabri. It was just a parenting book. It wasn't a spiritual book, except it was, because everything's spiritual, but she's deeply spiritual, this woman, so it happened to find me through that route. And it said, listen to your breath. When you get upset or anxious, listen to your breath. Because my love for that child, there was a longing in me, like I need to change. I can't be this walking dead person for her. It was really that love for that child. And even looking back, even in all that period of darkness, I still loved. I would go to her whenever she cried. I would hold her. I was showing up. I was not perfect, but I was really trying. So I started reading this parenting book to try and be more, to try and love better. I was so acutely aware, it's like I'm fucking this up. She's so beautiful, this being that's been given me. And that was the impetus. So I'm reading this book and it's saying, listen to your breath. So I started just sitting quietly and listening to my breath. It's in this dark, dark place. And I remember one day I felt to sit by the window, face the sun. And I did this. And for the first time, I felt God again. I felt God like when I had always. And I felt so much shame. I'd never felt that. I felt like, oh my God, I've called you names. I've shook my baby. I yelled at like, this baby is God. And I yelled, screamed, I've punched walls. I've been crazy. I felt just deep shame. Like it was really like that. And then this feeling arose in me just naturally of, I don't need atonement from God. I felt this deep sense of I need to atone me. So I did it. It just kind of happened naturally. It just happened. I said, it's okay. Like I am. I've done my best, and I forgive me. And it wasn't from God to me. And as soon as it was from me to me, my own atonement, I felt God more deeply. It was like God was always there. And I want to reaffirm, when I say God, I don't mean a man in a white cape, right? I mean life, consciousness, source, light, that which we are. It was always there. It was me blocking it from me. It's my own rage and hatred and pain, and who knows where that's come from. Probably lifetimes and needed an imprinting here to be worked through, But without concepts, without needing to know, that pain needed to process. It needed the screaming in the car. It needed the smashing the walls. It needed to be felt, because I couldn't do that in childhood. There was no safe place to do that. So it needed that, right? And once I went there, once I actually went there, then it could start moving through and out, and then the light can come in. So I felt God in that moment. Keep listening to my breath over the weeks. And then one day, and motherhood for me had always been a no. It was a deep no in my system. Like every time she was like, Mama, I want milk, I'd be like secretly in me, I'd be like, oh, fuck this. I'm just sat down. Or like it was always that for me. And I see these mums like so gracious. Yes, darling. Now, of course, I did that on the outside. Sure, darling, no problem. The inside was like, ah! Like, really. And I was playing the gracious wife and doing, and it wasn't true. And this day, she had a particularly horrendous day. She kept falling over. She kept grazing her knees or needing more food, or like this constant, like say, wetting her pants, and then I had to change. It was just like work all day. It was just work. It was work. It was work. Running away, whatever. This day, she fell down again. She was crying, and I can't tell you what happened. This is just, I can just tell you what happened, but I don't understand it. I looked over to her by the door, and she was reaching her. I always get emotional when I think of this. She was reaching her fat little hand out, like, Mama. She always wanted me. She never wanted her dad or anyone else. It was me. It was an intensity that was felt like suffocation to me, right? Mama. And I looked at her, and I thought, fuck. And I got up and I walked to her, and as she reached, something happened. And my whole insides kind of imploded or fell in on themselves, and I just picked her up, and it was a yes. It was a yes. And she did this weird cry, this like high pitched, like I'd never heard it. Like I'm a mum, I know every cry, hunger cry or a tired cry. I don't know if it's even worth saying this, but we were in this vortex together as I held her. No one else would see this from the outside. There was something magical woo-woo happening, and her pitch went extremely high. She was processing something and releasing something. I started kind of like shaking, and I was holding her, and I just gave over. It wasn't a choice. My system was exhausted, and I just gave over. I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. And anyway, we sat in the sun afterwards. I was sitting in the garden, and something was different. And I was like, I felt weird, spacey, all of it. And over the next kind of few weeks, every day the light came in more and more deeply. It was a moment, and it was like a boom and not a boom. Like it was a complete change. It was October 2018. That just everything changed. I remember like little things. I came out in the morning one day, and the whole garden was filled with light. I mean, I'd looked at this garden many times. I could see the light in every leaf. It was alive. Joy came in, light came in. I was remembering who I was. It was like, and I don't mean on some esoteric level, I mean just who I had been before she came in childhood. It was more like who I had been, and then who I was fundamentally. It was like, I remember who I am. I remember having that thought like, how could I forget? How could I forget what I was, and the beauty and the magic, and huge things were happening. I could suddenly see symbolism everywhere, and it was really like a curtain had been lifted. I could see the symbolism. I could see and hear how nature spoke to me. And it's really hard to explain this. I still have it. It's just more integrated now. It seems very, very normal. But it was like there were messages for me everywhere about what to do and where to go and what was happening. I didn't need books. It's right in front of us. People come into our path and they speak. It's not random. It's exactly what we need. The language of life, it's always moving us and beckoning and speaking to us. So I had this huge shift. And people around me were kind of starting to say, what's happened to you? And we're different. I was in work and people were like, you're levitating. Like, what? And I don't want to pretend that. this is about some big spiritual orgasm or anything, and then we're all fine. I was figuring it out and I had no concepts. And spending a lot of time sitting, I had to just be in silence. I would just sit, and joy would just in my body and myself was just, it was like if hell was a state, heaven's a state. And then pain started coming up. I started to see where I was stuck. It's like the light comes in, and it doesn't mean that there's some big orgasm and we're suddenly fine, right? It's like the light comes in, and what I've come to see or understand, it's as if it seeks out the dark, its equivalent in darkness that's in us, and it wants to bring it out. And I had these experiences, like I fell to my knees one day on the carpet and I said, I need to clean my light body. And I heard myself say it, and I surprised myself. I was like, what does that mean? I need to clean my light body. It's as if I was no longer doing anything. I could see there weren't the thinking. I could see how it was happening. So the body, the human, was falling down and saying that, and yet I didn't know what that meant. I had to Google it. A light body, energy body. Okay, what does that mean? And I had heard yes, and then after that, I started having little knowings, and it started straight after that. I walked out to my deck, and it's like I had this experience of two bubbles popping. The boy whose heart I broke, my first love. And I broke his heart, and he was beautiful. And we'd been together 2 years, and he'd broken everyone else's hearts. So he wasn't that, and then there was me, and he really loved me, and I really hurt him. I left him for someone else, and I was careless. That popped. You need to say sorry. And then a girl that I had not been nice to in high school, you have to say so. So I went through this kind of very tender, very innocent. It started small, writing some letters. I'm really sorry how I treated you then, and blah. And then over a period of time, big things were coming in. So I would kind of address the things as it happened. Life and its wisdom and its love for me and its intelligence was bringing me through this beautiful organic process. Now, I had no spiritual books. I had no idea about any of this. So I was just following. I was listening. I was listening to God, source. I was listening to what was coming through, and I was listening deeply to what life was wanting to teach me. Life was the education and the curriculum. So I would listen deep, and it still happens to me that way. It's like 5 times this week, dandelion tea has come across my path. So I know, okay, I have to have the tea. I don't know why, but I know it's guidance. The more I've attuned and listened and given over and followed, like being really obedient to those things, not needing to know why, just listening, the more I've opened. So I went through this period of deep healing. It wasn't easy. It's not love and light. Like, yes, I was held in a deep sense of okayness. There was this deep sense of okayness. So we could say suffering goes then, because even though I was dealing with traumas, having flashbacks and memories that needed processing, things like I was shown past lives. I was in meditation, and I heard, do you want to see a past life? And I would agree, yes. And then I would just simple lives, nothing extravagant, but I would see deep patterning in my way of being in the world. So I would see these alarming patterns that I had never seen, my blind spots, and I'd have to work through them. And even though I was in these amazing transcendent places, having these incredible experiences, I would see my patterns play out. I would see myself snap at my husband, and and suddenly there was space between me and that behavior. Suddenly I was not the personality, right? The personality is almost still moving in the world as it had been. Many things fall away immediately, and there's this newness and this, but some things, they stay, right? You see yourself like doing the old pattern, the old limiting belief, the old behavior. And there was a period of being invited to work through all of that. Are you going to face that? And to do that, we have to actually, the shame and the like, oh my God, look who I am. Look who I am. We have to be robustly truthful with ourselves, like, far out, I'm still that guy. And then this process of gently and compassionately, I'm human too. Like, I'm everything and the all, and I'm human too. So having to work through those things so that I can be in the world this love that I am. That it's not just I go to all these high places, but can I be this? Like that to me felt like the job here. I would be trying to meditate and my daughter would wake up and wake up and wake up and I'd be like, fuck. And I would ask them why. Like, you want me to be spiritual? Like, here I am being spiritual. Like, and I heard one morning, this is your work. Turn toward her. And I knew this is my meditation. Like, what's here is can I be peaceful in my response to her when the person wants to do something else? Like, so refining these virtues, can I be kind? It sounds really simple. It's not sexy. I'm not flying off to India to, anoint my body and do all this cool stuff. Like, can I be patient? Like, can I be kind? Can I love here? And can I love me when I see myself not love?
I think everything you just said in that statement of she is your work, and I think that's just such a profound moment where you're here in meditation, you're feeling blissful, you're having a connection with what's greater. And the moment that's happening is mom is being called, taking you away from that. And everything you're describing just gives such a sense of union, right? Lessening and lessening separateness. I mean, this was what yoga means. All these practices of yoga is union, right? And so it sounds very much like a sense of like karma yoga, and where it's everything that you do is being connected. And so, funny enough, a quote that stood out to this very thing is from the book was, as John often reminds us, that the appetites must be directed to God through love, employed by loving God. And I think, and it's so subtle and so hard to do because there's just such a deep surrender behind that, where you describe how you don't even know if you're the one doing it. You're kind of just observing it. It's the saying is, am I digging the ditch or is the ditch being dug? And it's the sense of humility, right? Humility isn't thinking lesser of yourself. It's thinking less of yourself, thinking just less in general of yourself and this service.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
And that loving opens us. But there's a place where how we perceive God loving us, or how lovable we perceive ourselves to be, influences how we can love other, right? Because if I had a critical mother or a critical father, and we talked about this earlier, but I subconsciously think of God as a critical father because of that. If I think of the external gaze as critical, how can I ever surrender and fall back? And if God's gaze is critical, his love is conditional, right? So if the love I'm receiving is conditional, if I have to earn God's approval by being good, by being worthy, if I have to be enough to get God on side or for God to love me, the love I'm receiving is conditional. Therefore, the love I give will be conditional. Right? So there's a place in finding, if we really want to find surrender, finding the place in us, and if we need to do work on this, doing work on this, that knows we are loved completely, unconditionally, because then we can fall back into that. So that's what that atonement thing was. It wasn't from God. It was from me. And it wasn't a coincidence a few weeks later the deep surrender could happen. Because I can only fall back into the arms of flow and life if I trust that I'll be called, right? But if it's critical, if it's kind of conditional and hateful, I can't do that. And so this way that love opens us, it's multifaceted. It's how do I receive my love? Can I receive love? Can I be lovable when I want to commit suicide, when I'm exhausted, when I'm crying, when I was not a perfect mother, when I'm Ryan who's falling to pieces and is sick? Am I lovable here? There's such a peace in that, and letting ourselves be lovable here. And that comes from us to us. That comes from God. God is always loving us. Every hair on our head is loved by life. But can we do it And then the more we do that, the more we links in with that insanely beautiful quote you just read, the more we can give that. Then I can love you and you and you and you, and there's no condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just had a lady on before who gave an account of Whisper in the Heart, of a book she wrote, and of another realized being, another realized saint named Kula Baba. And many would go to him at an ashram and ask, how do I find God? How do I find God? And he would say, be like Christ, just serve and serve, and Christ would get lost in love, essentially. Not the dogmatic thing what to do, but it's getting lost in love in everything. And I think your story is just so beautiful of an example. And again, just that assurance for whoever might be going through this or might have it come up as the journey continues, to see what's on the other side of it, because seeing the surrender that everything ends up being provided. And that's just such a far out thought, where if I were to let go of it, it would just all be provided. Something as small as have dandelion tea, where it all ends up being provided, being able to trust that more and more. And I think it is a process, right? It's not a binary thing where all of a sudden I have confidence in truth. I think it
Yeah.
very much of a progression, and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. And asking for help, what we spoke about, like, like I often call out for help. It's not like I always know. I've had many awakenings since that one. I've had the paralysis and all the energy through my heart for half an hour, and I've had visits from angels, weird, and God, and healings, and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I am human. And like I had my heart broken a few weeks ago from a boy, and I cry, and I say, God, like, help me to know I'm not alone. And I ask, I'm still there too, because the human, I honor her, you know? Yes, I am the all, and I'm in that place, and I know. And any suffering is really held in that deep love and that sense of all as well. It's all kind of a play, and I get that. And the human has a broken heart, you know? So we honor that. We let her grieve. We do. And when we say we lead with love, we just do our best, right? Because I also go, fuck love today. I feel tired, so we try our best, and that is enough. It is enough. We really do.
Yeah, I think this idea that we're shedding skin, it's like a snake. It's only going to shed at the rate that it's going to shed. And I think just doing the best we can at any moment. And there are no conditions with love from the divine, right? It is all conditional
Mm.
in ourselves.
And
That's
sacred process, that sacred process. Like a fetus turns into a baby by itself. We have to do things like support it with good food. But at the end of the day, we don't control whether we lose the baby, whether it becomes a baby. Like every day, it's growing just like you and I. We can't put our finger on it, but we know a year later, there's a birthing. And it's just like me and you. So that trust, like going out into the world, feeling the sun on our face, knowing we are okay, that any mess we're in today is a sacred mess, because it needs to be this way. It's not all love and light and joy. There is some suffering, and the suffering opens us. It deepens us. But also, where can I find the joy? Where can I focus on that if I can, if it feels okay today? And that compassion, like, here I am walking the life of a human.
yeah.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try, and that's enough. I'm going to try to love and open my heart and love. But it's okay when I can't. It's okay, because that's loving me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to be perfect. None of that.
Yeah.
That's ideas.
Gosh. Well, Lucy, thank you so much. To end, I've been mentioning it. I figured I would end with the poem I had heard when I heard your story. And I know you do poetry.
Mm.
Working on a book right now of all the poetry that you do. The way you speak is very poetic. So I figured this would be fitting. So I thought I would I'd share it very quick, and I'll share a link in the description. I'll try to find it because I feel, St. John the Cross was spoken. This had to be translated in many ways. I'll try to find the link for it because I think there's a lot of versions of this.
Wonderful.
This is good. Yeah. So real quick, it said that this is a song of the soul's happiness and having passed through the dark night of faith and nakedness and purgation to union with its beloved. One dark night fired with love's urgent longings. Ah, the sheer grace. I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. In darkness and secure by the secret ladder disguised, ah, the sheer grace. In darkness and concealment, my house being now all stilled. On the glad night in secret, for no one saw me, nor did I look at anything, with no other light or guide than the one that burned in my heart. This guided me more surely than the light of noon to where he waited for me. Him I knew so well, in a place where no one else appeared. O guiding night, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that has united the lover with his beloved, transforming the beloved in her lover. Upon my flowering breast, which I kept wholly for him alone, there in a breeze from the fanning cedars. When the breeze blew from the turret, he wounded my neck with his gentle hand, suspending all my senses. I abandoned and forgot myself, laying my face on my beloved. All things ceased. I went out from myself, leaving my cares, forgetting among the lilies. And so with
Wow, that is absolutely beautiful.
yeah,
Thank you.
there's a lot of poetry in here. And so what stood out to me the most was the phrase that my house being now all stilled, mentioned a couple times, that purification of the senses, of going within, as you mentioned, not looking out, and then by the secret ladder disguised, all the sheer grace. He describes in the description now the ladder being faith, being confidence, being trust, disguised in the dark night. And it can be hard to see it this way in the moment, but appears to end up being grace for it all to deepen that connection. So
yeah, if it's here, it's grace, and if it's not here, it's grace. Yeah, it's beautiful, Ryan. Thanks for reading that.
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, if anyone wants to find you afterwards, I know a poetry book will be coming out. I know you offer spiritual guidance services to people. Know a bit of a waiting list for it, but if anyone did want to contact you afterwards or connect with you.
Of course, yeah. So I'm a counselor and therapist, so I do that, and a lot on Zoom, and then spiritual guidance and mentorship with the path.
Yes, and I know you have a 14-day Sangha you believed you were mentioning again.
Yeah. So I'm starting a Sangha. It's going to be every 2 weeks. People have been asking for about a year, and I just didn't feel like it was the right time, but now I really feel it is. And yeah, just a kind of a place for us to gather, meditate, and have some talk and some questions, and just to be together, like to deepen together into our own hearts, into our own beings. There's such power in togetherness, that energy, that field. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so anyone who wants to join that can find me. The easiest way is Facebook, actually, just Lucy Grace. You'll find me there. And
okay.
Yeah.
I'll put all your details in description for people to be able to find you. And I think coming together, being seen, being loved to let go. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yes. No, thank you so much. And as always, everyone, hope to find you on the other side of the veil in our next episode. Until then, stay well. Thank you.
Wow, I got to watch the Ayurveda one. That sounds so cool.
What's that?